Most of the stories were written before the collection existed, published years before in many cases. So it's actually the reverse. Call and response came out of looking at some of the things I thought were my best work and what I had. And very oftentimes I like to go back and, leave myself a little bit of world I haven't explored and find out what the implications of that was. And that kind of reminded me of the call and response of the Black church, how a sermon goes, but also, the call and response musical form, like a sea shanty. And I have a lot of nautical based stories. But in one case, the Lonesome Sea, the new story for the collection, that was influenced by the form because I already had that in mind. And in the original story, which is one of the last stories in the collection, Canst Thou Draw Out the Leviathan, Pip is a very minor character who serves a very important role, but he's kind of strange and haunted. And at one point he says to John Wood, the freedman, that he stole his own freedom. And that was something I hadn't really panned out yet. I hadn't really expanded on it, and it was a lot of fun, especially thinking of the structure of how the book was going to work, to go back and figure out how that happened and to explore where Pip developed from. Because in The Lonesome Sea, he's a fairly ordinary young man, like spirited, kind of bright, curious, and creating the transformation from that to kind of haunted prophet of doom was a lot of fun. Originally, I'd actually planned to have him be a pearl diver because in the 1700s, 1800s, there were enslaved children who were employed as pearl divers in the Americas. Unfortunately, there were none that would have worked with the location of where Pip's from. They're mostly not Anglophones. They're mostly in Spanish-speaking countries. And since Pip is clearly from the early United States, it kind of changed the concept a little. But I did keep in a giant pearl that Agwe sits on as kind of a reference to the original concept. I come from a background that incorporates a lot of ritual into daily practice, very religious. My father's side, especially, very Catholic. Lots of going to Mass, lots of doing things like novenas, rosaries, etc. It's also from South Louisiana, so there's a lot of kind of folk practices incorporated into daily life. My grandmother yelling at me for putting a mirror on the bed, and say your prayers, but also maybe get some brick dust in case anybody's crossed you or cursed you. Things to remove hexes, things not to drink from strangers, that sort of thing. And kind of growing up with that worldview, also loving fairy tales, loving folk tales. Virginia Hamilton's The People Could Fly was a thing that I read cover and cover from the time I got it at 6 or 7, and until it was ribbons, and I probably had 3 different copies. Influenced a lot of my early writing and stories. And it's something that I like to represent in the world because it is in my world. And so it kind of influences the background of most of the things I write. I have written some realistic fiction, and I don't have a problem with that, but I often don't think that my fiction is unrealistic just because an element of magic is in the world. I think that there is elements of magic in the world, even if it isn't something that is as obvious as transforming into a fish or burning a city down with magical salt. Anyway, it just is a natural progression of how I grew up and how I viewed the world. The first advice I would have to give is to trust your reader. Readers are much smarter than a lot of people give them credit for. You don't have to tell them every single thing that happens in the world. You don't have to sketch it all out for them in the beginning. You don't necessarily have to have a huge glossary of terms. You can if you want to, and if you like doing that, that's absolutely fine. but a lot of things people can pick up from implication and inference. And ultimately, reading is sort of a collaboration with the writer. The reader takes their own background, their own imagination, their own details, their own life experience, and puts it in with your story. So trust them to do that. You don't have to, magic up the entire world for them. You can kind of suggest it. The other thing about emotional weight. For me, one, the world probably needs to matter to you, the writer. It needs to be something that you're invested in and something you care about, because it's much easier to make other people care about something that you yourself have strong feelings for. And the other thing is to make things feel real. Like, take care of some of the mundane details. What do people eat? Like, what do they do for fun? What are the things that are getting in the way of what they want? And having something getting in the way of what you want once you've made a character who is someone that the audience not necessarily relate with. It's not always important to have a character that the audience relates with, but someone that the audience can understand and is interested in following. That adds an enormous amount of kind of emotional realism to your world. The most immediate thing that's next for me is in Call and Response, there are a pair of short stories about Tommy and Davian. They open and end the book. They're a pair of hustlers who rob a bank with many complications. And there is a third story that will be in Uncanny Magazine in the January-February issue early next year. It wasn't something I originally planned, but I'm very excited about it. They're very fun characters to follow. That will be out really shortly. Other than that, I am slowly working on finishing up a novel, which is kind of taken a back seat to a bunch of other things, the launch of the collection, for instance. And I'm going to go back full-time to working on that starting at the end of November. And I also have a novella that I will be trying to wrap up. So those are the two next things in the pipeline for me. And then I'll probably go back to short stories, because I love short stories. They're fun to write.